Imagine boarding a flight expecting a routine journey, first-class ticket in hand, only to be confronted with disbelief and discrimination. Marcus Hale, a calm yet powerful black CEO, finds himself denied the very seat he purchased, challenged not by circumstance, but by entitlement and prejudice. As whispers fill the cabin and eyes turn toward him, the question lingers. How far will one man go to reclaim dignity in a space that is supposed to be safe, fair, and professional? Will a single voice of authority truly shift the power dynamics in a room filled with hesitation, fear, and unspoken biases? How does one maintain composure when confronted by systemic prejudice, while simultaneously demanding accountability, set entirely on a plane hurtling thousands of feet above the ground? This is more than a story of privilege and entitlement. It's a story of courage, resilience, and the quiet force of justice. The tension, the confrontation, and the unexpected resolution will make you question what it truly means to stand your ground. If you're ready to witness a story that blends high-stakes drama with moral clarity, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us as we take you on a journey you won't forget. The cabin hum was soft, a steady white noise of recycled air and idling engines, the kind of sound that lulled travelers into a half-dream as they scrolled their phones or sipped champagne. Flight 927 from JFK to San Francisco was minutes from closing its doors. First class was a sanctuary of leather seats, dim golden lighting, and whispered conversations. Then the intercom snapped to life. "Captain Reynolds, please report to the front cabin immediately." Captain Reynolds to the front cabin. The voice of flight attendant Kelly Morton was sharp, almost venomous. It cut through the calm like a shard of glass. Conversation stopped. Tablets paused mid-scroll. Even the sound of ice clinking in crystal glasses ceased. 187 passengers lifted their heads in unison, a collective ripple of unease running through the aluminum skin of the plane. In seat 2A. Marcus Hale had not moved in 17 minutes. He sat still, a figure carved from patience, his broad shoulders set against the curve of the seat. The fabric of his tailored navy suit caught the low light, immaculate, precise. His hands rested lightly on his lap, clasped loosely, unthreatening. But the stillness was misleading. Beneath the calm surface, a storm was already brewing. He knew this pattern. He had seen it before, lived it before. Kelly stood in the aisle, posture rigid, smile stretched thin like spun sugar, a brittle mask of professionalism coated with unease. She had asked him once, politely, for his boarding pass. He had shown it. She had asked again, this time insisting on ID. He had calmly replied that his boarding pass was valid and sufficient. Now, her voice over the intercom had turned the quiet of first class into a stage. Passengers craned their necks. A man in 1C, tapping his Rolex impatiently, muttered about delays. A newlywed couple in 2C whispered nervously, hands cupped to shield their gossip. A teenager in 4A tilted her phone upward, starting a live stream to a circle of friends. The feed counter ticked slowly upward. Dozens, then hundreds. The first drops of a digital storm. Kelly's eyes narrowed. "Sir, you are delaying this entire aircraft," she said, voice taut with authority she did not quite command. "The captain is on his way." Marcus finally moved. His eyes lifted from the face of the antique timepiece on his wrist. An Aaron and Sona, a relic of German precision engineering. His gaze was calm, steady. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that carried centuries of weight. A smile that said, "I have seen this before, and I am not afraid." "I know," he said, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to absorb the light around him. At that same moment, his phone vibrated softly against the armrest. A single message lit the screen. From a contact labeled legal, the words were brief, efficient. Assets mobilized. "The stage is yours, sir." He did not react. He did not need to. His stillness was an act of quiet defiance, a refusal to play the part assigned to him by suspicion and prejudice. Yet inside, a whisper of weariness tugged at him. How many times in his 48 years had he been asked to prove his legitimacy, to justify his place in boardrooms, at hotels, at country clubs, now, here, again, on a plane where he had paid full fare for a first-class seat. Each incident was a cut, small on its own but cumulative, scars layered over scars. The curtain at the front of the cabin rustled. Captain Thomas Reynolds appeared, 4 gold stripes glinting under the lights. He moved with the gravity of a man who had spent 3 decades guiding steel giants through turbulent skies. His eyes were pale, cold as a winter horizon. To Reynolds, passengers who defied the crew were like engine fires, rare, dangerous, and requiring immediate suppression. "Report," he said, his voice clipped, commanding. He had not been questioned in 25 years of flying. Kelly pointed at Marcus, her finger trembling despite her steel. "This man has been occupying seat 2A for almost half an hour. He refuses to present a valid ID to match his ticket. He has been non-compliant and evasive." The captain's gaze slid to Marcus, appraising, the Italian's suit, the posture calm, not aggressive. The watch that cost more than his car. Nothing about the man screamed danger. Yet Kelly's voice was tight, and Reynolds had trusted her instincts for years. She had saved him from potential disasters before. He trusted her now. That, he would later realize, was his first mistake. "Sir," Reynolds said, turning fully to Marcus, "I'm Captain Reynolds. I understand there's some confusion about your seating," without a word. Marcus reached to the seat beside him and lifted his boarding pass. Heavy cardstock, embossed with the Sky America Airlines crest. Flight 927, New York to San Francisco. Seat 2A. Passenger Marcus Hale. Reynolds took it, fingers brushing the paper's thick edge. He scanned it carefully. The font was correct. The barcode clean. The name matched the passenger manifest he had reviewed before departure. It all checked out. "This appears legitimate," Reynolds said, his voice softening ever so slightly. "It's a forgery," Kelly hissed, her whisper loud enough to reach half the cabin. "Captain, look at him. Really look at him. Does he look like he belongs here?" The words hung in the air like smoke. "In seat 5C. Maya Tran angled her phone higher. Her live stream counter leapt from hundreds to thousands. Comments flooded the screen. Did she just say that OMG? Flying while black? Here we go again. Sky America is about to get roasted. Reynolds felt the eyes of nearly 200 passengers pressing in. The weight of judgment multiplied by the invisible thousands watching online. In 1C, the man with the Rolex tapped it louder, glaring at Marcus. The honeymooners whispered more furiously. The teenager in 4A grinned, her own live stream capturing the scene from another angle. This was no longer a passenger dispute. This was a spectacle. A trial by public opinion. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, his voice low but dangerous, "clarify what you meant by that statement." Kelly's composure cracked. "You know what I mean," she snapped. "People like him. They don't pay cash for first class. They scam with stolen miles, fake upgrades. He's playing a game." The words landed like a slap. A ripple of disbelief surged through the cabin. A woman in 3D gasped audibly. Maya's live-stream comments were a waterfall of outrage. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm, deliberate. "People like me," his words were soft, but they cut sharper than any shout. The cabin fell silent, suspended in the weight of the moment. Kelly's face flushed crimson, fear curdling into anger. "Don't twist my words," she snapped. "I process hundreds of passengers a day. I have a sixth sense for this. I know who belongs." Marcus sat motionless, but inside, the old familiar ache burned, the endless presumption of guilt, the reflex suspicion. How many times will this script replay in my life? His father's voice echoed in memory. "Son, they will doubt you before they know you. Carry yourself so they cannot mistake your strength." Marcus lifted his eyes to Captain Reynolds, waiting. He knew the storm was just beginning. The tension in the cabin thickened like humidity before a storm. Passengers who had been staring discreetly now openly leaned into the aisle. Some lifted phones higher, lenses capturing every flicker of expression. The atmosphere was no longer polite discomfort. It was expectation. Collective curiosity sharpened into judgment. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Marcus Hale remained seated, his posture unchanged, as though the drama unfolding around him was a play he had already seen too many times. But his eyes, calm as they seemed, carried a weary fire. Kelly Morton's smile had vanished. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her arms folded across her chest in a defensive knot. She had stepped past professionalism into something raw, fueled by instinct, the kind of instinct she had always trusted but never questioned. In her mind, she had convinced herself she was protecting the integrity of the cabin, protecting her airline, protecting order. But deep beneath that justification lay an older reflex, one rooted not in duty but in suspicion of the man in seat 2A. "Sir," Kelly said, her voice sharp, "I'll need to see a government-issued ID immediately. Driver's license, passport, something. That boarding pass doesn't prove anything." Marcus did not flinch. His voice was steady, measured. "The boarding pass is valid. You can scan it. It matches your manifest. That is all that is required." Her cheeks flushed. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Captain Reynolds glanced between them, his hand tightening on the back of seat 1B. He had been trained to trust his crew, but he could feel the weight of eyes, the invisible presence of live-stream viewers. Protocol told him to support his attendant. His gut told him something else, something quieter, but he ignored it. In 5C, Maya Tran whispered into her phone's microphone, narrating for her viewers. "He already showed the ticket. She just doesn't believe him. Guys, this is unbelievable." Her viewer count shot upward, comments scrolling too fast to read, words like racism, discrimination, and lawsuit peppered the feed. Marcus leaned back slightly. He remembered a moment years ago at a 5-star hotel in Zurich where a concierge had insisted he wait while other guests breezed through check-in. He had complied that time, swallowing his pride, choosing peace over confrontation. He had gone to his suite with his dignity bruised, wondering if silence had been the wiser choice. That memory now pressed against his chest. Should he yield again? Should he hand over his driver's license simply to diffuse this storm? The thought lingered only a moment before he dismissed it. Yielding had never stopped the cycle. Silence had never rewritten the story. His presence here, his calm refusal, was not just for himself, but for every person who had been quietly questioned, quietly doubted, quietly erased. Captain Reynolds shifted his weight, his voice firm. "Mr. Hale, for the sake of everyone's peace of mind, if you could just provide another form of identification, we can resolve this quickly." A murmur of approval rolled through the cabin. Some passengers nodded, eager for the disruption to end. The man in 1C spoke louder this time, exasperation dripping from his tone. "Yes, please. Some of us have connections to make. Let's not waste another minute." Marcus turned his gaze toward Reynolds, his expression unchanged. Inside, however, he felt the first stirrings of anger hardening into resolve. He could almost hear his mother's voice from childhood. "You do not bow when you are right. You stand, and you let them see your spine." "My boarding pass is valid," Marcus repeated calmly. "Your systems confirm it. If that is insufficient, the problem is not with me." Kelly's composure cracked further. "Captain, he's being evasive. Listen to him. He's buying time. Who sits there quietly for half an hour like a statue? He's up to something." Maya's phone captured every word. Her chat exploded. "This is crazy. She's panicking. He's literally just sitting there. I cannot believe this is happening in 2025. The cabin lights seemed harsher, the air thinner. Reynolds rubbed the back of his neck. Frustration building. "Ms. Morton, keep your voice down. We don't need to alarm the entire cabin. It's too late for that," Marcus said softly. His eyes flicked across the sea of faces. Strangers who now carried their own judgments of him. Strangers who would go home tonight and tell the story of the black man in first class who caused a scene, no matter what the truth turned out to be. The thought twisted in his chest. But he stayed steady. Kelly straightened, her voice trembling yet defiant. "Captain, I know my instincts. People like him." She caught herself too late, the words escaping like poison from a wound. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gasps rippled. Maya's hand shook as she angled her phone closer, her whisper trembling. She said it. Oh my God, she said it. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. He had heard those words too many times in too many variations. But here, in this cabin, with so many witnesses, the phrase landed with the weight of history. He opened his eyes again, gaze locking on Kelly. "People like me," he repeated, voice low but resonant. His calm delivery was more devastating than a shout. It forced every person within earshot to confront exactly what had been implied. Kelly's lips trembled. "I didn't mean it came out wrong." "Did it?" Marcus asked quietly. He leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, but firm. "Or did it come out exactly as you meant it?" Reynolds looked away, jaw tight. His stomach twisted, a feeling he tried to bury. He thought of his own son, mixed race, just 12 years old. He imagined him grown, sitting in this seat, questioned not for what he had done, but for what he looked like. The thought unsettled him, but he said nothing. Authority demanded control, not confession. Around them, first class had become a courtroom. Passengers were no longer silent observers. They were jurors, recording, streaming, passing judgment in real time. The verdict was already forming online, outside the captain's control. Kelly's hands shook. She tried to salvage her stance, clinging to procedure. "Captain, we need to remove him before departure. This is delaying the flight." Marcus's phone vibrated again. He glanced at the message but did not move to reply. The words were clear. "Stand firm. Cameras rolling. Public watching." He exhaled slowly, the sound controlled, almost meditative. "I am not leaving this seat," Marcus said. His tone was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a scalpel. "I have complied with every requirement. I am in my assigned place. The only confusion is the one you have chosen to create." The captain's patience thinned. "Mr. Hale, you need to understand. This is not only about you. We have nearly 200 passengers who expect to leave on time. I must ensure their comfort." Marcus met his eyes. "And my comfort. My dignity. They are expendable." The words landed heavy. Reynolds looked away again, his throat dry. He could not answer. "Not yet," Maya whispered to her camera, voice tinged with awe. "He's not backing down. He's so calm. But it's hitting harder than if he yelled." The teenager in 4A murmured agreement to her own viewers. "This is going to blow up. This is history." Kelly's jaw clenched. Her instincts screamed at her that she was losing control, that this man's calm was more dangerous than aggression. She turned back to Reynolds, desperation sharpening her tone. "Captain, if you let this slide, every passenger will think we can be challenged. We'll lose authority. We can't allow it." Marcus looked at her, his expression unreadable, but inside he felt the exhaustion pressing heavier, always the burden of proving, disproving, explaining, always the suspicion first, respect later. He thought of his boardroom, the gleaming windows high above Manhattan, where his word alone moved millions of dollars. Here, in this cabin, his word was worth nothing. He glanced once more at his watch, not to check the time but to remind himself of control. Each second was his choice, each pause was deliberate. He would not be rushed. The cabin air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. The storm was building, gathering energy, waiting for the next strike. Marcus knew it was coming. He braced himself, calm but unyielding. The battle was no longer about a boarding pass. It was about something far older, something that refused to die quietly, and Marcus Hale had no intention of letting it pass unseen. Captain Thomas Reynolds stood tall in the narrow aisle, his uniform immaculate, 4 golden stripes shining on his shoulders. For 30 years he had carried the authority of the sky, guiding machines heavier than houses through violent storms and landing them gently on runways slick with rain. In his world, hesitation killed. He had lived his career by a creed when faced with a problem. Act quickly, act decisively, and never let authority be questioned. Now, inside the still cabin of Flight 927, that creed rose to the surface. His gaze swept over Marcus Hale in seat 2A. The man looked calm, too calm. Reynolds had seen this kind of composure before in passengers who were determined to resist authority. Sometimes it masked agitation, sometimes it hid arrogance. Either way, it was dangerous to the order of the cabin, and yet nothing in Marcus's posture suggested a threat. He was composed, patient, a man waiting for the storm to pass through him. Kelly Morton stood rigid by the captain's side, her face pale but set in determination. She wanted validation. She wanted him to see what she saw, to confirm her instincts. "Captain, he's refusing to comply. He won't show ID. He won't move. He's been stonewalling for half an hour." Reynolds cleared his throat. his voice carrying the clipped certainty that had silenced flight crews and passengers alike for decades. "Sir, this will go easier for everyone if you simply provide the documents requested. We can clear this up and get in the air." Marcus's eyes lifted slowly from his lap to meet the captain's. His gaze was steady, neither hostile nor submissive, but heavy with something else, the exhaustion of a man too familiar with these confrontations. "Captain Reynolds, I have provided my boarding pass. It is valid. I am in my assigned seat. If that is not enough for you, the issue is not mine to resolve." The words were polite, precise, and devastating. Reynolds felt the eyes of nearly 200 passengers pressing on him. He knew the law gave him wide authority to remove anyone who disrupted the flight. But his instincts wavered. Marcus was not yelling. He was not refusing orders belligerently. He was simply still, his calmness louder than any argument. Kelly shifted uneasily, realizing that Reynolds had not immediately moved to act. She raised her voice. "Captain, this is exactly how con men operate. Quiet, composed, rehearsed answers. He's practiced this. Look at him. He's manipulating all of us." Marcus did not move. He let the accusation hang in the air, let the ugliness of it sit with the passengers. Inside. He wrestled with himself. He could end this in one moment by reaching into his wallet and producing his driver's license. He could surrender to the demand, appease the suspicion, let the flight move forward. A part of him longed to do just that, to avoid the spectacle, to be left alone in peace. But another part, the part shaped by years of carrying not only his own dignity, but that of others who looked like him, refused to yield. If he complied now, the story would vanish into silence, another invisible act of prejudice buried in memory. He thought of his father again, telling him as a boy, "Sometimes we stand not because we want to, but because others need us to." From 5C, Maya Tran's phone caught every word. Her live stream viewer count climbed into the tens of thousands. Comments scrolled in a furious blur. "He's right. Why does he need extra ID? This is blatant. My blood is boiling watching this." Reynolds could feel the pressure in the room magnify. This was no longer just about one seat. This was about the judgment of thousands he could not see, but whose presence he could feel pressing on the back of his neck. The man in 1C, impatient hedge fund manager, tapped his watch again and muttered loudly enough for half the cabin to hear, "Unbelievable. We're all being held hostage by one passenger. Just remove him already." Reynolds exhaled sharply. He had handled engine failures, medical emergencies, even a bird strike on final approach once, but nothing in his training manuals had prepared him for this. He turned back to Marcus. "Sir, if you continue to refuse, I will have no choice but to escalate. I must consider the safety and comfort of every passenger on this flight." Marcus's reply came measured, quiet, "And my safety, my dignity. Do they not count?" The words pierced Reynolds in a way he did not expect. For a fleeting moment he saw his son again, older, perhaps in a suit one day, traveling for business, sitting in a first-class seat. Would another attendant, another captain, look at him the same way Marcus was being looked at now? The thought lodged itself in his chest like a splinter. He swallowed hard, trying to push it away. Kelly broke the moment with another sharp burst. "Captain, please, if we let him win, we lose control of the entire cabin. They're watching us. We have to show strength." Marcus turned his head slowly, his eyes locking on her. Strength is not forcing obedience out of prejudice. Strength is standing for what is right. His tone was low, even, but the cabin heard every word. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. A woman in 3D looked down at her lap, ashamed she had thought the same words Kelly had spoken aloud. The atmosphere was now combustible. The slightest spark would ignite it fully. Reynolds knew he needed to act, but his certainty faltered. Protocol screamed at him to support his crew. His conscience whispered a different truth. He stood between those voices, paralyzed, his decades of authority suddenly feeling fragile. Maya's voice whispered again to her phone, her audience swelling past 30,000. He's dismantling them with calm words. I've never seen anything like this. Marcus, though outwardly calm, felt the tremor inside him grow stronger. He thought of his position, his wealth, his power, the shields he had built through accomplishment and discipline. And yet none of it protected him here. In this cabin, he was still subject to suspicion first, dignity second. The realization stung, though it was hardly new. He steadied his breathing, forcing the storm inside him into silence. Captain Reynolds finally straightened, his jaw set. His training overrode his doubt. He had lived his life by the principle that order must be preserved. He would not break it now, not in front of his crew, not in front of his passengers. His voice carried the weight of authority he had wielded for a lifetime. Mr. Hale, if you do not comply immediately, I will be forced to remove you from this aircraft. Gasps rippled. Phones tilted higher. Maya's hand shook as she whispered, "He's doing it. He's really going to do it." Marcus's calm broke only slightly. His voice edged with steel. "No, Captain Reynolds, I will not leave my seat. I will not surrender my rights to appease your attendant's prejudice." The silence that followed was absolute. The line had been drawn. The next act of the drama would decide not only the course of this flight, but the reputations, careers, and futures of those involved. Reynolds felt his heart thud heavily. A man who had faced storms and mechanical failures suddenly realizing the most dangerous crisis of his career was not in the sky, but here, in this cabin, on the ground, in front of strangers and cameras. He lifted his hand to his radio, voice clipped, ground. "This is Captain Reynolds. We may need security to the aircraft." Maya's stream count surged past 50,000. Online outrage burned hotter. The passengers sat frozen, suspended between fear and fascination. And Marcus Hale, seated calmly in 2A, felt the weight of history pressing against his chest. He had chosen his path. He would not move. The storm had only just begun. The cabin of Flight 927 had become a chamber of suspended breath. Time itself felt stretched, the air thick with anticipation. Marcus Hale remained seated, his calm presence more unnerving to his accusers than if he had raised his voice. Calm was power. Calm was control. Calm was also infuriating. Kelly Morton's nerves had begun to fray. She had stood in front of hundreds of passengers in her 8 years of service. Diffused tempers, soothed complaints, even comforted families in moments of grief. But this was different. This man did not defer to her authority, did not bend to her demands, did not give her the satisfaction of compliance. Each second of his silence magnified her own unease, and beneath that unease lay the echo of words she could not take back. People like him. The cabin had heard it, the cameras had captured it. Maya Tran's live stream was now a torrent. comments flooding so fast they blurred into a wall of outrage. The count of viewers had soared past 70,000. The words, "flying while black," were already trending on 3 platforms. Kelly did not yet know the full scale of what she had unleashed, but she could feel it in the heat of eyes pressing into her back. Captain Thomas Reynolds adjusted his cap and straightened his shoulders. He needed to act, to reclaim control. His radio call for security had already been made. It was only a matter of minutes before officers arrived at the cabin door. He told himself this was procedure, nothing personal, a matter of order. Yet inside, doubt gnawed at him, the image of his own son flickering in his mind like a warning. Still, 30 years of command had trained him to suppress doubt. Doubt did not keep planes in the air. Kelly's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cracking under strain. "Captain, the other passengers are growing uncomfortable. They paid for first class, for peace and safety. This man is disturbing everyone." Marcus turned his head, his eyes steady on her. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried across the cabin with the force of something undeniable. "I have spoken less than 10 words since boarding. If your definition of disturbance is my silence, perhaps the problem is not me." The words struck harder than if he had shouted. Several passengers shifted in their seats, guilt flickering across faces. They knew he was right. They also knew that their own silence made them complicit. The teenager in 4A whispered to her phone. "He's destroying her argument without raising his voice. This is history in real time." Kelly felt her composure unraveling. The words she had spoken earlier replayed in her mind, burning her cheeks. She tried to rebuild her defense, clinging to procedure. "Captain, I trust my instincts. I know when someone is trying to cheat the system. He doesn't belong in that seat. He doesn't belong here." Marcus did not flinch. Instead, he repeated her words softly, as if tasting them. "Doesn't belong. Because why? Because you cannot imagine someone like me in this space." Reynolds's stomach tightened. The question hung like a weight in the air. He could feel every eye watching. Not just the passengers, but the invisible thousands streaming on their devices. The pressure of unseen judgment pressed heavier than gravity. The man in 1C erupted, impatient snapping his restraint. "Captain, for God's sake, we've wasted enough time. Remove him. I paid $3,000 for this seat to avoid this nonsense. If he can't prove he belongs, he shouldn't be here." Maya's stream exploded. The comments raged. Did he just say that $3,000 doesn't buy you the right to racism? This whole plane is complicit. Marcus turned to the man briefly, his expression calm but piercing. "And you, sir, did you prove you belong when you sat down, or was your skin enough?" The hedge fund manager flushed, words catching in his throat. He turned away, muttering under his breath, but the cabin had heard him falter. Kelly's breathing quickened. Her authority was crumbling, her certainty cracking, in desperation. She reached for the intercom again. "Security to the front cabin. Immediate assistance requested." The announcement echoed through the plane, sealing the escalation. Marcus inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He felt the storm's eye close around him. He could almost hear the voices of his board members, his legal team, the people who had prepared him for this possibility. Still, it was different to live it, to sit under the gaze of strangers and cameras, accused for nothing more than existing in a space he had paid to enter. He checked his watch again, not for time, but for resolve. His phone buzzed softly. Another message. This one simple, almost reassuring. Hold steady. The world is watching. Captain Reynolds finally broke the silence, his voice clipped, weary. Mr. Hale, please, cooperate. Show us another ID. Let us move on. Marcus leaned back slightly, his composure unbroken. His words were measured, almost surgical. Captain, let me ask you, in your 30 years of service, how many times have you required a white man in a suit to provide more than a boarding pass? The question detonated in the silence. Reynolds felt it like a physical blow. He searched his memory, decades of flights, faces, conversations. Not once had he asked. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked down at the carpet, shame pressing against his ribs. Kelly seized the silence. This isn't about race. This is about protocol. No, Marcus said quietly. This is about prejudice. You assumed. You accused. And now you are exposed. The words left her trembling. She wanted to protest, to deny, but the truth of them sat in her chest like lead. The cabin door hissed. 2 security officers stepped inside, their uniforms crisp, their movements practiced. Officer Lopez, tall and broad, scanned the cabin quickly. Officer Harris, younger, jaw set tight, moved beside him. The energy shifted instantly. Authority had arrived in physical form. Passengers sat straighter, phones tilted higher. Maya whispered breathlessly into her mic. Security's here. This is about to explode. Kelly pointed sharply at Marcus, her voice breaking. That's him. He's been non-compliant, refusing lawful orders, disrupting the cabin. Marcus did not move. His eyes tracked the officers as they approached. Inside, his heart pounded, not from fear but from the weight of inevitability. He had seen this scene play out too many times for others. Now it was his turn. He would not let it end the same way. Officer Lopez's voice was firm, professional. Sir, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us. We can resolve this outside the cabin. Marcus's reply was calm, deliberate. No, I'm in my assigned seat. I'm not leaving. Gasps rippled. The officers exchanged glances. Officer Harris placed a hand near his cuffs. His jaw tightened. Sir, refusal to comply with crew instructions is a federal offense. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. Marcus's voice dropped lower, steady as stone. Do you know Federal Aviation Regulation 911? Officer, do you know what it means to interfere unlawfully with a passenger's rights to interstate commerce? Lopez hesitated. Harris frowned. This was not the script they expected. Passengers leaned in, hearts pounding. Maya's stream count rocketed past 90,000. Marcus folded his hands in his lap again, his voice carrying an edge of steel. If you attempt to remove me without cause, it will be unlawful arrest. It will be recorded, and it will cost your department dearly. The officers faltered. Reynolds's radio crackled in his ear. The voice of ground control barked. Captain Reynolds. Social media reports are going viral. Hold position. Corporate is monitoring. Reynolds's chest tightened. He was losing control. Authority, the thing he had built his life upon, was slipping from his hands like sand. He glanced at Kelly, whose face was twisted with anger and fear. He looked back at Marcus, whose calm seemed carved from stone. For the first time in 30 years, Reynolds felt powerless. The spark had caught. The fire was burning. There would be no easy resolution. The presence of the two officers transformed the cabin into a courtroom. Authority had arrived in uniform, and yet the jury was already seated in rows 1 through 30, with their verdicts streaming live to the world beyond the fuselage. The silence was deafening. Every shift of fabric, every muted cough, every click of a phone camera was amplified by the pressure of what was unfolding. Officer Lopez, a broad-shouldered man with a calm face, positioned himself slightly forward. Officer Harris, younger and less patient, hovered closer to Marcus Hale's armrest, his hand resting lightly on the restraints at his belt. Their body language was clear. They were not here to debate. They were here to remove. Kelly Morton's voice rang out, thin and cracked. "That's him. Seat 2A. He's been defiant, hostile, refusing every lawful request." Her words felt rehearsed, as though she were trying to convince herself as much as the officers. Marcus raised his head, his eyes steady, his voice low but audible. "Officers, I am seated in the place for which I purchased a ticket. I have complied with every regulation. What I have not complied with is the prejudice of your crew." Murmurs rippled through the rows. Several passengers ducked behind their phones, trying to steady shaky recordings. Maya Tran's live stream counter passed 100,000 viewers. The scrolling chat now unreadable. News networks were joining in, rebroadcasting her feed in real time. The cabin of Flight 927 was no longer just a pressurized space in the sky. It was a global stage. Officer Lopez cleared his throat. His tone was firm, rehearsed, but there was hesitation in his eyes. "Sir, this does not have to be difficult. If you'll step off with us, we can verify your information and get you rebooked." "No." Marcus's voice sliced through the tension. He did not raise it. He did not need to. The word itself carried the weight of a verdict. Kelly's composure snapped. "Captain Reynolds, you cannot let him refuse." "This is trespassing. This is obstruction. Ms. Morton," Marcus interrupted, his voice edged with something sharp and sorrowful. "The only obstruction here is your refusal to believe that a man like me belongs where I am." The words landed heavier than turbulence. Reynolds flinched as if struck. For a moment he wanted to defend his crew, to cling to the chain of command that had shaped his life, but the memory of his son flickered again, this time stronger, burning shame into his gut. Harris stepped closer, his patience gone. "Sir, last warning. Stand up or we will remove you." Marcus tilted his head, his eyes locking on Harris. "Before you act, officer, answer me this. In your 10 years on duty, how many white passengers have you restrained for sitting quietly in their assigned seat?" The question was a blade. Harris's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The silence was answer enough. Marcus pressed further, his voice steady as stone. "And how many black passengers?" The air cracked with tension. Harris's face reddened. He glanced at Lopez, but his partner's expression betrayed discomfort. Harris muttered, "This isn't about race. It's about compliance." "No," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet fury of years. "It is always about race. You just never say it out loud." The cabin door hissed. Another voice crackled through Reynolds's earpiece. "Corporate operations," the clipped, urgent tone of a senior executive. "Captain Reynolds, this is Robert Kane from headquarters. We are monitoring multiple live streams from your aircraft. You are to halt all escalation immediately. Do you understand?" Reynolds swallowed. The weight of authority he had leaned on for 3 decades suddenly shifted above him. He was no longer the final word. The corporation had entered the cabin, disembodied but more powerful than any uniform. "Understood," Reynolds muttered, his voice cracking for the first time. The passengers closest to him saw the color drain from his face. Kelly, however, pressed on, her voice rising toward hysteria. "Captain, you can't back down now. Everyone will think we've lost control. He's manipulating this entire cabin. Can't you see it?" Marcus exhaled slowly, his restraint beginning to fray. He thought of the many times he had chosen silence in the face of small humiliations, of the weight of invisibility he had carried like a second skin. He thought of his company boardroom, where he sat at the head of the table, commanding respect without question. And he thought of his father's words echoing like scripture. "Sometimes you must hold the line, son, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you." He leaned forward slightly, his voice filling the cabin without force. "Captain Reynolds, Officer Lopez, Officer Harris. You are being recorded from 15 angles. Every word, every move is already in the hands of the public. Choose carefully. Your careers, your reputations, your legacy, everything rests on the next minute." The words were not threat, but prophecy. Maya's camera shook as she whispered to her audience, "Oh my God, he's in control now. They can't touch him. This is unreal." Her comment feed exploded. Viewers tagged civil rights attorneys, journalists, activists. The incident had become a movement. Lopez shifted his stance, suddenly less sure. His training had not prepared him for a passenger who wielded law like a shield and truth like a blade. Harris, still simmering, muttered, "This can't end with him winning." Reynolds heard the whisper, and it chilled him. This was no longer about authority. It was about pride, ego, bias. He looked at Marcus, sitting so still, and for the first time saw not defiance but dignity. A man simply refusing to be erased. Another crackle from his radio. Kane's voice again, sharper now. "Captain, confirm compliance. The board is already convened. Media outlets are running with this. De-escalate. Now." Reynolds closed his eyes for a beat. 30 years of certainty collapsed under the weight of that order. When he opened them, the cabin was watching. The world was watching. He felt as though he stood naked before them all. Marcus spoke again. Softer now, but with a gravity that bent the room. "Captain Reynolds, why should I have to prove my right to sit here? Why must I justify my existence in this space? You have flown for 30 years. Answer honestly. How many white men in suits have you ever asked that question?" Reynolds's throat worked. But no sound came. His silence was louder than confession. Kelly stumbled back a step, her world collapsing. She realized in that moment that this was no longer a passenger dispute. This was history being carved, and she was standing on the wrong side of the blade. Officer Lopez finally lowered his hands. "Captain," he said quietly, "maybe we should wait. This doesn't feel right." Harris glared at him but did not move. The authority he carried in his cuffs had dissolved in the weight of cameras. The intercom buzzed. Ground control again. "Captain Reynolds, CNN has requested comment from corporate. MSNBC is looping the live stream. You must act with caution. Repeat, act with caution." Passengers shifted, whispers swelling like a tide. Everyone knew, everyone felt it. This was no longer a routine flight. This was a turning point. Marcus leaned back again, his composure unshaken. His voice reached every corner of the plane. "Ladies and gentlemen, You're witnessing not just an argument over a seat. You're witnessing how prejudice becomes policy, how silence becomes complicity, and how dignity is demanded, not granted. Phones tilted higher. Maya's audience crested 150,000. Comments poured like a flood. History, hero, stand strong. Captain Reynolds felt sweat bead under his collar. For the first time in his life, he had no command to give. He was a man caught between protocol and justice, and both were slipping from his grasp. Marcus folded his hands once more, his watch gleaming in the overhead light. His calm returned, the kind of calm that spoke louder than thunder. Captain, I am not leaving this seat, and I am not leaving this truth unspoken. The line was drawn, and this time it would not be erased. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside the cabin of Flight 927 the air felt brittle, as if the slightest spark could shatter it. The officers stood frozen between duty and doubt. Captain Reynolds lingered in the aisle, the authority in his voice hollowed out by corporate interference. Kelly Morton's face was pale, her certainty leaking from her like air from a punctured tire. And Marcus Hale sat in his seat, unmoved, watching it all unfold with the patience of someone who had been here many times before. His phone vibrated softly against the armrest. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. A message had arrived from a contact labeled legal. The words were short, clinical, but heavy as stone. Assets mobilized. The stage is yours. Marcus slid the phone back into his pocket. He lifted his eyes toward Reynolds, who stood rigid like a soldier awaiting orders from an unseen general. Captain Reynolds, Marcus said, his voice low but clear. You asked me to prove myself, but you never asked your attendant to prove her accusations. You trusted her instincts. You doubted my humanity. And now the world is watching the cost of your assumptions. Reynolds's throat constricted. He wanted to protest, to explain, to insist that protocol had guided him, but protocol felt flimsy now, exposed as a mask for something uglier. His eyes darted to the overhead bin, anywhere but at Marcus. Kelly stepped forward, her voice rising with desperation. You're twisting this. You're making me out to be something I'm not. I was just doing my job. I was protecting this plane. Marcus turned his gaze on her, and the weight of it made her falter. Protecting it from what? Ms. Morton, from a man reading quietly in his seat. From a ticket you didn't believe belonged to me because of the color of my skin. Tell the truth. At least once today. Who were you protecting them from? Her lips trembled. The answer clung to her tongue but refused to come. Before the silence could stretch further, the captain's radio erupted with a burst of static. A new voice cut through, deeper, colder, dripping with executive authority. Captain Reynolds, this is Senior Vice President Robert Kane. You are to cease all attempts to remove the passenger in seat 2A immediately. Acknowledge. Reynolds's shoulders sagged, the golden stripes on his uniform suddenly feeling like weights. His reply was weak. Acknowledged. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, realizing that something far greater than an unruly passenger was unfolding. Maya Tran's phone shook in her hands as she whispered breathlessly, "Oh my God, corporate just intervened. They're watching this in real time." Kelly's face twisted in disbelief. "What? You can't be serious. He's manipulating everyone. You can't let him win." The radio crackled again. Kane's voice was sharper now. "Ms. Morton, If you're speaking, stop. Effective immediately. You are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Do not address the passenger again." Kelly's mouth fell open. Her world tilted beneath her feet. 8 years of service. Hundreds of flights. And never once had she been silenced like this. She stumbled back a step, her eyes darting around the cabin, searching for someone, anyone, to validate her. None came. Marcus exhaled slowly, steadying himself. This was the moment. The line between private humiliation and public reckoning had already been crossed, but now it was time to reveal the truth. He reached down, lifting a slim leather portfolio from beneath his seat. His movements were slow, deliberate, every motion captured by dozens of phones. Officer Harris stiffened, his hand twitching toward his cuffs. "Sir, no sudden movements. I'm retrieving documentation," Marcus replied evenly. He opened the portfolio, withdrawing a single heavy card, embossed with an elegant crest. He placed it on the armrest, sliding it toward the nearest officer. Lopez picked it up. His eyes scanned the lettering, and the blood drained from his face. His hand shook as he passed it to Harris. Harris frowned, reading aloud before he realized the weight of the words. Marcus Hale, Board of Directors, Horizon Airlines. The cabin detonated in whispers, gasps, disbelief. Board of Directors. Not a manager, not an executive, but a man sitting at the very top of the corporation. The man whose decision shaped the future of everyone wearing the uniform of Horizon Airlines. Kelly's knees buckled. She collapsed into the nearest seat, her face buried in trembling hands. Her entire argument crumbled in an instant. Reynolds' vision blurred. The words refused to settle in his mind. A board member on his flight. In his first-class cabin, and he had treated him like a criminal. His 30 years of service, his pension, his legacy. He saw them slipping away like smoke. Marcus leaned back, his voice calm but edged with iron. "You demanded proof of my worthiness to sit here. There it is. Proof enough for you. Captain, proof enough for you. Ms. Morton. Or will you demand more until my dignity is stripped bare?" The cabin was silent, save for the frantic tapping of passengers sending messages, uploading clips, broadcasting the revelation to the world. Maya's live stream count leapt past 200,000, the comments exploding into jubilation and fury. He's the board member. They tried to humiliate their own boss. This is history. The radio hissed again. Kane's voice returned, but now it carried urgency bordering on panic. "Captain Reynolds, corporate is assuming direct control of this flight. You are to comply with all directives from headquarters. Do not attempt to remove or reprimand Mr. Hale." "Do you understand?" Reynolds croaked. "Yes, sir." Another voice joined the frequency. Female, commanding, unmistakable. "This is Elaine Crawford, CEO of Horizon Airlines. Put me on speaker." The color drained from Reynolds' face entirely. The CEO herself, his ultimate superior, was speaking directly into his ear. He fumbled with the radio, his hands shaken, and the cabin filled with her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crawford said, her tone icy but controlled, "this company has just witnessed an act of prejudice on board one of our aircraft. Let me be clear. Horizon Airlines will not tolerate discrimination in any form. Mr. Hale is not only your fellow passenger, he is the chairman of our board. Every word, every action taken against him has been recorded, and we will respond decisively." The cabin gasped. "Chairman, not just a board member, the chairman of the entire board of Horizon Airlines." Marcus watched as the realization spread like fire through the room. Phones shook in trembling hands. The officers stepped back, their authority reduced to ash. Reynolds clutched the seat beside him for balance, feeling 30 years of command evaporate in seconds. Kelly wept silently, her body folding in on itself. Elaine Crawford continued, her voice a blade. "Captain Reynolds, you and Ms. Morton will be met by corporate security upon arrival. Your actions today will be reviewed not by HR, not by a supervisor, but by this board. You are no longer in command of this aircraft in spirit, only in duty. Do you understand?" "Yes," Reynolds whispered, the word a confession. Marcus folded his hands again, the leather portfolio resting beside him like a gavel. He spoke softly, almost with pity. "Now do you see, Captain? You judged me unworthy until proof of power forced you to reconsider. But power was never the point. Humanity was. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared move. The cabin was no longer a space of travel. It was a tribunal, and Marcus Hale had revealed the truth with devastating precision. The plane was still on the ground, but everyone on board knew they had already taken off into a storm larger than any sky could hold. The cabin was quieter than a chapel. Passengers who moments earlier had muttered complaints now sat transfixed, their screens glowing as they streamed the revelation to the world. Kelly Morton remained hunched in her seat, her shoulders quaking, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. Captain Reynolds hovered in the aisle like a man unmoored, his stripes gleaming but his authority stripped bare. The officers, Lopez and Harris, lingered nearby, but their posture had shifted. They no longer looked like enforcers, they looked like spectators. Marcus Hale's presence filled the space without effort. He had not moved from his seat. Yet it seemed the cabin revolved around him. His silence alone carried weight, but when he finally spoke, his voice resonated with the clarity of a gavel striking wood. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus said, not just to the cabin but to the invisible millions watching beyond it. "You have witnessed how quickly assumptions can become accusations, and how accusations can become humiliation. All without evidence, all without cause, and all because of a single truth that no one wished to say aloud until now, the color of my skin." The words landed with a force that made even the engines seem muted. Passengers squirmed. Some looked down at their laps, shame flickering in their eyes. Others nodded, their faces alight with recognition. In the third row, a honeymooning couple whispered to each other. The husband finally leaned toward Marcus, his voice trembling. "Sir, I owe you an apology. When she said you didn't belong, I thought maybe she was right. I didn't question it, and that's on me." Marcus regarded him for a long moment. He gave a slow nod, not of absolution but of acknowledgement. "Silence," he said gently, "is its own form of participation, but recognition is the first step toward change." Maya Tran's live stream erupted with comments. "They're admitting it. People are owning their bias on camera. This is huge." Marcus turned his gaze to the officers. "Officer Lopez, Officer Harris, tell me honestly, had I been a white man in this seat, would you have stood here ready to restrain me?" Lopez's lips parted, then closed again. His jaw tightened as if he were wrestling with the weight of honesty. Finally, he shook his head. "No, sir, I wouldn't have." The admission cracked the air like thunder. Harris shifted uncomfortably, his pride refusing to allow the same words, but his silence betrayed him. Kelly lifted her head from her hands, her face raw and desperate. "You're making this bigger than it is." "I didn't mean it that way." "I didn't." "You did," Marcus interrupted softly. "You meant every word. Maybe not with malice, but with certainty. And certainty is the most dangerous form of ignorance." Her sob caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to deny, to beg, but the cameras were unrelenting, and the truth was undeniable. The radio on Reynolds's belt chirped again, the voice of Robert Kane, strained but steady. "Captain, the board is assembled. Media coverage has reached critical mass. CEO Crawford has instructed me to tell you this. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt further action against Mr. Hale. The crisis team is preparing statements. You will deliver this plane safely to Denver and then report directly to headquarters." Reynolds closed his eyes. The order was final, stripping away the last illusion of command. He nodded, though no one had asked for it. Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, he lifted it and tapped the screen. A video call bloomed into existence on his tablet, its glow casting a cold light across his face. The boardroom appeared. A half-dozen executives stared back at the cabin, their expressions grave. "Marcus." Elaine Crawford's voice came through, cool and steady. "Are you safe?" "I am," Marcus replied. His voice carried the exhaustion of restraint, but also the fire of purpose. "But what has transpired here cannot be contained with press releases and statements. It demands accountability." The CEO's eyes flicked toward the screen, aware that thousands of passengers and hundreds of thousands of live stream viewers were watching. "And accountability there will be," she said. "This airline will not hide from its failures." Gasps rippled through the cabin. This was no polished PR speech. It was raw, immediate, and damning. Marcus angled the tablet so that Kelly Morton's tear-streaked face filled the frame. "Ms. Morton," he said, his tone cutting but not cruel. "Repeat what you told me, about people like me." Her lips trembled. I can't. You must." His voice hardened, because denial will not erase it. "Say the words." Her chest heaved as she whispered, barely audible. "I said, people like you don't belong here." The cabin froze. The live stream chat exploded. Kelly covered her mouth as if she could stuff the words back inside. Tears streamed down her face. Marcus looked back at the board on the tablet. "You heard her. This is not an isolated slip. This is systemic. 47 complaints in 1 quarter, unresolved. And today, the mask slipped in front of the world." Elaine Crawford's face was grim. "You are right, and the consequences will be proportionate." Marcus leaned forward, his voice resonant, almost solemn. "This is not just about me. This is about every passenger of color who has been humiliated, degraded, removed from flights for no reason beyond bias. Today, we make an example. Today, we draw the line." The words ignited something in the cabin. Passengers who had remained silent now raised their voices. A woman in row 6 called out, "I saw it. He wasn't doing anything." She just assumed another from economy shouted, "I'm black, and this happened to me last year on another airline. Nobody believed me. Now the world sees it." Maya's phone nearly overheated as the viewership counter surged past 300,000. Journalists from every major outlet were quoting her stream in real time. The flight was no longer a journey. It was a tribunal, a reckoning. Reynolds's knees felt weak. He gripped the back of a seat to steady himself, His voice, once commanding, now broke as he whispered, "God forgive me. I never saw it this clearly before." Marcus's gaze softened for just a moment. He saw the crack in the captain's armor, the glimpse of humanity beneath the uniform. But empathy did not erase accountability. The CEO's voice broke the silence from the tablet. "Mr. Hale, what would you have us do?" Marcus's answer came without hesitation. Begin by acknowledging the truth, then commit to structural change. Bias training, independent review, zero tolerance. And let today stand as the case study for what happens when prejudice goes unchecked. The board members exchanged glances. One of them, a man with steel-gray hair, nodded. "Consider it done." Marcus leaned back, his strength unshaken. "Good, because silence has been the policy for too long, and silence ends today." The engines rumbled as the plane prepared to taxi, but inside, the passengers remained locked in their seats, captivated not by the promise of arrival but by the gravity of what was unfolding in the skies. The tide had turned, and nothing not Kelly's tears, not Reynolds' shame, not corporate spin could roll it back. The aircraft finally began to move, a low rumble beneath the cabin floor. Outside the windows, ground crew scurried with headsets and neon vests, unaware of the storm inside the fuselage. Yet no one inside cared about taxiing, about schedules, or even about Denver. The passengers were riveted, held hostage not by metal restraints but by history unfolding 20 feet above the tarmac. Marcus Hale had not raised his voice once, yet his presence filled the cabin like thunder. The CEO's face lingered on the tablet, her eyes sharp, her words echoing in every ear. Accountability, reform, change. But Marcus knew words, even corporate words, could evaporate like condensation unless anchored by action. The eyes of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, demanded proof. He turned his gaze to the passengers themselves, the silent jury who had been watching this trial with their phones. "You've seen everything," Marcus said, his baritone steady. "You've witnessed every word, every assumption, every humiliation. Now tell me, am I guilty of being in this seat?" The question struck the cabin like a match. Silence lingered, thick and oppressive. Then, slowly, a woman in row 3 raised her voice. "No, you weren't guilty of anything. We all saw it. She judged you before she spoke to you." Her courage rippled. A college student in row 7 spoke next. "I was streaming too. People on my feet are saying the same thing. You didn't do anything wrong. It was bias. Plain and simple." The floodgates opened. A businessman in row 1, who earlier had tapped his Rolex in irritation, cleared his throat. His voice was low, reluctant, but undeniable. "I admit it. When she questioned you, I thought, well, maybe she had a reason. I didn't question her motives. I wanted the flight to leave on time. Convenience mattered more to me than fairness, and that's on me." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes softening. That honesty is where change begins. The officers shifted uneasily, no longer authority figures but witnesses. Harris's face was flushed, his pride stripped raw. Lopez bowed his head slightly, as if acknowledging that the room itself had passed judgment. Maya Tran's live stream surged to nearly 500,000 viewers. The chat was ablaze. They're admitting it. This is bigger than a lawsuit. This is a movement. Kelly Morton's breathing grew ragged. She had never felt so naked. The uniform that once gave her authority now clung like a costume from a bad play. The world had heard her words. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind, innocent eyes that one day might search the internet and find this moment preserved forever. Her shame was no longer private. It was eternal. Marcus looked at her, and though his expression was stern, there was no gloating. Ms. Morton, redemption begins with truth. Do you see now what your assumptions cost? Not just me, not just this flight, but the entire company, and every passenger who watches in horror, knowing they could be next. She couldn't answer. Her tears streamed freely, her voice a broken whisper. I see it. God help me. I see it. Captain Reynolds swallowed hard. His hand trembled on the seat back. His voice, once clipped and commanding, now cracked with the vulnerability of a man confronting his own reflection. Mr. Hale. Marcus. I can't undo what I did today. I can't undo 30 years of looking the other way. But if you'll allow it, I want to learn. I want to make this right. Marcus studied him for a long moment. His eyes, usually steel, glimmered with something more human. Captain, making it right will cost you. Pride, reputation, comfort. Are you prepared to lose those? Reynolds nodded slowly, shame settling in his chest like lead. If that's the price of honesty, yes. The plane bumped lightly as it reached the runway, but no one noticed. The drama inside was louder than the roar of engines. Marcus turned the tablet back toward the boardroom. The executives sat rigid, their faces pale in the glow of screens. You've heard your captain. You've heard your crew. You've heard your passengers. What will Horizon Airlines choose, silence or transformation? Elaine Crawford leaned forward, her jaw set. Transformation, she said firmly. I will not preside over another quarter of complaints buried in bureaucracy. We will implement independent oversight. We will establish a zero-tolerance policy, and we will invest in training that confronts these biases at their root. Her words, broadcast through live streams and cameras, rippled outward like shock waves. Passengers clapped, some hesitantly at first, then louder, until the cabin swelled with applause. Marcus raised a hand, and the applause softened. Words are a beginning, but accountability must be lived. Ms. Morton, Captain Reynolds, you will become the face of this reform, not hidden away, not quietly dismissed. You will tell your story to every hub, every new employee, every trainee. You will stand in front of them and explain exactly what went wrong here and why it must never happen again. Kelly gasped. You want me to relive this over and over, yes, Marcus replied, his voice neither cruel nor kind, simply resolute, because your story will save others. Your humiliation today may prevent humiliation tomorrow. That is how you begin to repair what you broke. Reynolds's lips trembled. If that's what it takes, then I'll do it. His mind flickered again to his son, the boy of mixed heritage who would one day step into this world. He thought of him boarding a plane, of another uniformed stranger's glance. He felt a surge of determination cut through the fog of shame. The live stream comments exploded. They have to face it. This is real accountability. This could change everything. Marcus leaned back, his chest rising and falling slowly. He was tired, soul tired, but his eyes still burned with purpose. He tapped his phone, opening a draft press release already prepared. The passengers nearby glimpsed the headline. Horizon Airlines announces landmark anti-discrimination initiative after chairman's in-flight experience. Maya whispered into her phone. Oh my God, he planned this. He was ready for this exact moment. Her viewers erupted in awe and fury. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a reckoning. The engines roared as the plane accelerated down the runway, yet inside, the real motion was not forward, but upward. The tide had shifted. What began as humiliation was becoming transformation, and everyone aboard felt it. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, Marcus's voice filled the cabin once more, calm and steady, like a pilot guiding his passengers through turbulence. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Horizon Flight 927, the flight that changes everything. The engine's hum deepened as Horizon Flight 422 ascended into the pale afternoon sky, slicing through low-hanging clouds over the Rocky Mountains. Marcus Hale's gaze wandered over the cabin, watching passengers clutch their phones, some replaying clips, others scrolling live comments. The entire world had become witness to the incident, and the weight of that reality hung heavily over every face. He took a slow breath, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the vibrations of the plane beneath him. The air was thick, tense, almost electric, yet the true turbulence was not outside the windows. It was inside every mind aboard the aircraft. Marcus thought about how easily power could be misused, how bias, subtle or blatant, could fester unnoticed until it erupted in moments like this. It was one thing to know injustice existed. It was entirely another to see it, live, with your own eyes, and be powerless to prevent it. Across the aisle, his eyes met the familiar gaze of Maya Tran. The young law student had not flinched once, her camera steady, capturing every nuance. Her courage was remarkable. She had become an unwilling hero, a chronicler of truth in a world that often preferred fiction. Marcus wanted to tell her that the work she was doing mattered, that her voice could shape policy and culture far beyond this flight, yet he restrained himself. Words, no matter how earnest, could not replace action. From the front of the cabin, Kelly Morton's posture had stiffened. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her uniform, attempting to reclaim the authority that had evaporated within minutes. She avoided Marcus's eyes, which was probably wise. Confrontation was inevitable, and she was standing at the eye of a storm much larger than her own embarrassment. Captain Reynolds, normally calm and commanding, was now visibly shaken. He fidgeted with his headset, eyes darting toward the cockpit door, then back at Marcus. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, to explain that it wasn't personal, that it was policy, procedure, the weight of regulation, but none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the moment, the undeniable truth that had pierced through years of complacency. Marcus rose from his seat, the small tablet in his hand a silent weapon. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, yet radiating authority. He stood near the front of first class, allowing the cabin's length to observe him fully. The quiet that followed was almost reverent, every passenger holding their breath, anticipating what would come next. Today, I witnessed something that should never happen, Marcus began, voice calm yet firm. I was judged, not for my abilities, not for my character, not for anything I've worked for my entire life, but for the color of my skin. That judgment cost me dignity, and it cost every passenger here a moment of moral certainty about the people they trust to serve them. Kelly Morton's face paled. Her throat tightened. Marcus's words were not accusations, but an indictment of systemic failure. She felt every syllable like a stone dropped into her chest. sinking deeper with each phrase. The murmurs began among the passengers, not whispers of gossip, but the quiet acknowledgement that someone's experience could reflect a larger truth, a truth many had sensed but were afraid to name. "I am not here for revenge," Marcus continued, his gaze sweeping across the cabin. "I am here for accountability. I am here because silence allows injustice to persist, and I will not remain silent. And I will not allow the people I trust to uphold these standards to hide behind uniforms or procedures." Captain Reynolds swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. He wanted to speak, but Marcus's words had pierced the armor he had built over decades, the complacency, the small compromises, the dismissals. They all stood naked in the glare of Marcus's calm, unyielding presence. A woman in row 5 raised her hand, trembling slightly. "What about the crew's perspective?" she asked. "Do they get a chance to explain themselves?" Marcus nodded, acknowledging her courage. "Yes, every action has context. Every person has a story, but context does not excuse harm. Your story, your intention, does not erase the impact of your choices. That is the principle we must all reckon with." Kelly Morton's lips quivered. She could feel every eye on her, each gaze a mirror reflecting the weight of her actions. Memories flashed unbidden, the hurried boarding lines, the ticket scanners, the instructions she'd given to her staff. Each choice that had seemed inconsequential at the moment now appeared monumental. Captain Reynolds finally spoke, his voice low, careful, each word weighed. "Marcus, I want to be better. I want to understand. But this isn't just me. It's an entire system. Procedures, rules, biases entrenched for decades." Marcus nodded slowly. "And that is why this is urgent. Because the system, left unchecked, perpetuates harm. Today it was me. Tomorrow it could be any passenger, any crew member, any voice silenced or ignored." Maya Tran's livestream captured the moment in exquisite detail. Comments scrolled faster than any human could read. "We see you." Finally, someone speaking truth. This changes everything. She felt a thrill, not of triumph, but of profound responsibility. Every viewer was a witness, and every witness was now a potential advocate for change. The tension escalated as Marcus turned back to the crew. "You will participate in a full, public review. Every step you took, every decision you made will be documented. You will speak to the board. You will face independent oversight. And, most importantly, you will learn to recognize and counteract the biases that nearly ruined this flight." Kelly Morton's voice broke as she whispered, I never meant." Marcus held up a hand, not to silence her, but to pause the emotional spiral. "Intent is not absolution. Harm was done. Recognition and accountability are the first steps toward repair. You will face discomfort. You will face judgment. But you will also face an opportunity to change for yourself and for every passenger who will come after." Captain Reynolds exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I understand. I will comply. I will lead by example. If I have to, I will make this my mission for the rest of my career." The cabin was quiet, the kind of heavy silence that signaled transformation. Passengers leaned back, some wiping tears, others staring in stunned contemplation. The atmosphere was no longer about travel or schedules or airports. It had become a crucible for accountability, honesty, and reflection. Marcus turned his attention to the passengers, lifting the tablet again. "Every one of you is now a part of this moment. You have seen what bias looks like. You have seen how easily it can be allowed to persist. Carry this awareness forward. Speak up when you see injustice, and do not let anyone tell you that your voice does not matter. From the back of the cabin, a young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why was he treated that way?" His mother's eyes welled, because sometimes people see others through the wrong lens. "Honey, but we can choose to see the truth, and that's what makes a difference." Marcus smiled faintly. The moment was quiet, yet infinitely powerful. He had faced the humiliation, the systemic bias, and the public scrutiny. But he had also created a space where accountability could take root, where honesty could replace excuses, and where lessons could be taught not in memos or meetings, but in real time, with real people watching. As the plane leveled at 35,000 feet, Marcus felt a subtle shift in the cabin energy. Passengers who had been bystanders were now participants. Crew who had once been defensive were now introspective. Even those who had believed they were powerless were now witnesses, charged with carrying the story forward. The tablet buzzed with notifications, but Marcus ignored it. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself a moment of quiet, reflecting on the sheer improbability of what had just occurred. The confrontation had escalated beyond any single flight, beyond any single CEO or crew member. It had become a lens through which society could view itself imperfect, flawed, but capable of facing its reflection. Marcus looked out the window at the fading horizon. The Rockies stretched endlessly beneath a sky that held both storm clouds and sunlight. Just like the flight, just like the people, just like the institutions, they were all navigating turbulence. Some would crash, some would soar, but all were in motion, and motion itself held possibility. He exhaled slowly, straightened his tie, and prepared for what came next. The confrontation was over, but the true work was only beginning. The cabin remained quiet. No one moved to take their seats back, as if moving would disrupt the gravity of the moment. For Marcus Hale, this flight would be remembered not for its turbulence, not for its destination, but for the awakening it had sparked in every soul on board. Passengers whispered to each other, sharing thoughts, shaking heads, nodding silently. Some reached for phones again, others simply watched the CEO in awe. The world had seen injustice in real time, and Marcus Hale had ensured that it would never be forgotten. Marcus tapped his tablet, sending a message to Horizon Airlines board. The subject line was simple: accountability implemented. He leaned back, letting the vibrations of the aircraft carry. Captain Reynolds exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I never imagined a flight like this." His hands rested on the back of a first-class seat as he tried to steady his racing thoughts. The hum of the engines was a constant reminder of the responsibility he carried, but the weight of Marcus Hale's presence, calm and unyielding, pressed far heavier on him. Every decision he had made since stepping into the cockpit flashed before his mind like a relentless slideshow. Every assumption, every skipped check, every shortcut now seemed magnified in the light of scrutiny. Marcus moved slowly through the aisle, letting his gaze sweep over the cabin. His eyes met those of ordinary passengers, each absorbed in their own world until now, each forced to confront the silent hierarchies that had long governed their air travel experiences. The mixture of fear, surprise, and empathy in their faces told Marcus everything he needed to know. People wanted change. They wanted justice. and they were willing to witness it if someone courageous enough took the first step. Maya Tran lowered her phone for a moment and leaned toward Marcus. She spoke softly, so only he could hear. "You're carrying the weight of all of this on your own?" Marcus nodded. "It is not just mine. It belongs to all of us who have been overlooked, dismissed, or treated unfairly. Today, it was me. But that does not lessen the responsibility I feel for everyone else." Kelly Morton had retreated toward the back of the first-class cabin. Her uniform looked stiff and unnatural against the strain on her face. She was trembling, not with fear, but with the realization of the enormity of the moment. Her mind raced with questions she had avoided asking herself for years. Was she blind to the bias embedded in her own judgments? How many times had she been complicit without even realizing it? What cost had she imposed on passengers whose dignity had no witness, no recorder, no justice? The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, but now they were not whispers of gossip. Passengers exchanged glances, some nodding, others shifting in their seats as if adjusting to the gravity of what was unfolding. Marcus's calm authority had transformed the cabin into a living courtroom, a forum for moral reckoning. He did not shout, he did not threaten, yet every word carried the weight of inevitability. Captain Reynolds straightened slightly, gathering himself. His voice was low but firm. "Marcus, I understand now. I see the fault lines. I can't undo the mistakes, but I want to make this right. Let me help facilitate the accountability process." Marcus considered him carefully. Trust was earned, not assumed, but he recognized the sincerity in the captain's eyes. "Reynolds, this begins with transparency, full documentation, independent oversight, and you must actively engage in learning about how your decisions and the system you operate within impact every person on this plane. If you fail at that, then no apology or intention matters." Kelly Morton spoke again, this time louder. "Marcus, I need to understand. I want to understand. Please tell me how to correct what I've done." Her hands twisted nervously. Her voice, though small, carried a note of desperation. She had never faced such clarity before, never experienced accountability presented with such gravity, yet such opportunity. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Step 1 is recognition. Step 2 is action. You will participate in training designed to dismantle bias in real-world situations, led by independent experts. You will meet with passengers affected by these incidents if possible, and you will commit to ongoing reflection. This is not punishment. This is responsibility." Maya Tran raised her phone again, capturing every word. The live feed continued, and viewers from around the world were seeing a very human moment unfold. The combination of authority, empathy, and moral courage was resonating with people in a way that pure outrage never could. They were witnessing leadership, accountability, and the confrontation of deep-seated prejudice. Marcus walked toward the middle of the cabin, pausing to acknowledge passengers. This is not about blame alone. This is about changing the system from within. Recognizing that each of us, regardless of our rank or position, can either perpetuate harm or prevent it. Your choices, no matter how small, ripple outward. We all have a responsibility to ensure that dignity is not optional for anyone, anywhere, at any time. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Passengers sat forward in their seats, eyes fixed on Marcus. Some had tears in their eyes, not just from the confrontation but from the clarity of his message. Others were silently reflecting on their own experiences, recalling times when they had felt overlooked or dismissed, times when the world seemed to pass judgment without evidence or reason. Captain Reynolds exhaled again, quieter this time. The burden of command had never felt so heavy. He glanced toward the cockpit door, remembering the procedures, the autopilot protocols, the rules he had memorized and enforced. And yet, in that moment, all the manuals and checklists seemed meaningless. Leadership was not about following rules. It was about acknowledging responsibility, ensuring fairness, and confronting uncomfortable truths. Kelly Morton lowered her head. She understood the gravity of Marcus's presence, not as a threat, but as an unwavering moral compass. She felt exposed, yet strangely liberated. Confrontation had always terrified her, yet now it was necessary. Every misstep was now visible, every oversight magnified, and yet the path forward was clear acknowledgement, correction, and dedication to justice. Marcus paused mid-aisle, letting the silence fill the cabin. He allowed passengers to absorb the magnitude of the moment. He allowed crew members to wrestle with their consciences. He allowed himself a moment of reflection. He could feel the tension inside him, the lingering frustration, the flashes of anger and disbelief. But he tempered these emotions with calm. Control was not dominance. It was discipline, clarity, and unwavering adherence to principle. Maya Tran whispered to a nearby passenger, "This is unlike anything I've ever seen." He's calm, but everything he's saying is cutting through the noise. Marcus turned toward her, offering a faint, reassuring smile. Recognition of effort mattered. Courage was contagious, and her role as witness and amplifier was crucial. The cabin now held a fragile balance. One wrong word, one misstep, and the fragile civility could collapse. But Marcus's authority had shifted the energy. Fear was replaced by awareness, confusion by clarity, power by accountability. He finally addressed the crew again, more firmly this time. "I will personally ensure the board is informed. I will communicate with the oversight authorities. I will make sure that every aspect of this incident is thoroughly documented. You will cooperate fully. Resistance is not an option. The future of every passenger, the integrity of this airline, and your professional credibility depend on your willingness to confront truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be." Captain Reynolds nodded. There was no deflection left in his posture, no excuses. Every rationale he had rehearsed dissolved in the presence of Marcus's calm, insistent authority. This was a reckoning, and it was necessary. The flight attendants shifted, now fully aware that accountability was not abstract. It was real. It was immediate. It was inescapable. Every movement, every glance, every word spoken henceforth carried weight. Marcus returned to his seat, allowing the cabin to adjust. The air seemed lighter now, though the tension had not fully dissipated. Change had been set in motion. Fear had been replaced by reflection, outrage replaced by awareness. The passengers, witnesses to the moral clarity of the moment, carried the knowledge forward. Maya Tran lowered her phone with a deep breath. This is going to go viral, but more importantly, it will be remembered for what actually matters. Marcus tilted his head, thoughtful. Remembered is not enough. Action is what matters. Change is what matters. Today is only the first step. Tomorrow, we ensure that this flight is not an anomaly but a standard. Accountability is not episodic. It is constant. It is expected. and it is non-negotiable. The rest of the flight proceeded in a tense but reflective atmosphere. Passengers spoke quietly among themselves, discussing policies, fairness, and personal experiences. Crew members moved with more deliberate care, aware that every choice mattered. Marcus leaned back in his seat, eyes closed briefly, feeling the immense weight of the moment. His body was weary, his mind alert, and his heart resolute. The Rocky Mountains slowly disappeared beneath the clouds. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in the shades of gold and pink. Horizon Flight 422 continued toward its destination, but the journey had changed. Not just the plane, not just the passengers, but something much deeper, an imprint of accountability, courage, and moral clarity that would ripple far beyond the confines of the cabin. Marcus knew that the real work had only begun, but for the first time in his life, he felt a profound sense of alignment. His strength, patience, and clarity had made a difference. Justice had been seen. Change had been set in motion. And the world, even if just for a moment, had watched. The cabin remained tense but electrified. Every passenger felt the weight of the moment, their awareness sharpened by the presence of Marcus Hale. He had become more than a passenger. He was a symbol, a living embodiment of accountability and moral authority. People who had been passive observers suddenly realized they could no longer pretend the injustices of the past were invisible. Every glance, every subtle movement, every unspoken assumption now seemed to matter. Captain Reynolds approached Marcus, his voice quieter than before. "I want to make this right. Tell me what you need from me, from the crew." His hands were open, signaling surrender, a willingness to learn and change. Marcus studied him for a long moment. The captain's body language was different from before. The arrogance, the dismissiveness, the protective veneer of authority had cracked. "It begins with honesty," Marcus said. "Full disclosure of any incidents, however minor they seem. Every time protocol was bent, every decision influenced by bias or haste must be documented. Then, transparency with the passengers, crew, and independent oversight. Only then can trust be rebuilt." Kelly Morton stepped forward, voice trembling but determined. I understand. I have been complicit. I will do whatever it takes to make amends, to learn, and to change. Not just because Marcus says so, but because I see now how wrong I've been." Her admission filled the cabin with a tense energy, a mix of relief, disbelief, and respect. She was no longer hiding behind uniform, authority, or routine. She was accountable. Marcus nodded at her. "Recognition is the first step. Action is the second. You will participate in intensive training led by experts who specialize in bias, equity, and de-escalation. You will meet with those affected, and you will continue to report and reflect honestly on your progress. This is not symbolic. This is operational. Your willingness to engage will define your credibility." Passengers began murmuring among themselves. Some clutched their devices, recording, live streaming, or simply trying to capture a moment that felt historical. The world outside the plane was watching now. Millions of viewers witnessing a confrontation between ordinary authority figures and a profound moral reckoning. It was an unlikely but perfect stage for change, a microcosm of what society needed to confront daily. Captain Reynolds raised his head, swallowing the lump in his throat. "And me. What about me? I'm responsible for the safety of everyone on board, for every decision made in the cockpit. How can I participate meaningfully? Marcus's eyes softened but remained unwavering. Responsibility does not mean perfection. Responsibility means accountability. You will document, disclose, and participate in review processes. You will mentor your team and actively create systems that prevent bias from influencing operational decisions. Leadership is not about ego or command. It is about service and correction. If you succeed, you will lead with integrity. If you fail, the consequences will be clear and unavoidable. Kelly Morton felt the full impact of Marcus's words. For years, she had shielded herself with procedure manuals, regulatory compliance checklists, and an aura of professionalism. She had believed that following rules equaled fairness, and yet she had allowed moments of prejudice to shape her decisions. The realization struck her as a shockwave through her system. But instead of recoiling, she felt a strange liberation. Confrontation was painful, but the path to redemption was now visible. Maya Tran, still recording, whispered to the passenger next to her, "This is unlike anything I've seen before. He's calm, but everything he's saying is like it cuts through the noise. You can feel the change happening in the room, in people's minds." Marcus walked deliberately to the middle of the cabin, letting the silence and anticipation build. This is bigger than one flight, bigger than one airline, bigger than any individual here. Every decision we make in our lives, every assumption we carry, ripples outward. If we allow prejudice, bias, or negligence to govern our actions, the consequences are real and lasting. Today, you have witnessed an opportunity to correct, to confront, and to commit to doing better. Use it. Don't let it fade into a memory of spectacle. Make it matter. The murmurs in the cabin shifted to whispers of reflection. Passengers adjusted in their seats, leaning forward, contemplating their own experiences, their own assumptions, their own moments of complicity or passivity. Some reached for their phones to record, not just for social media, but as documentation of a moment that could inspire change far beyond the confines of the aircraft. Captain Reynolds spoke again, quieter, measured. "I understand now that leadership is not simply following procedures. It is seeing the human element, the consequences of every decision, and owning them fully. I cannot undo the past, but I can commit to action, to transparency, and to accountability." Marcus nodded, satisfied with the captain's words. Acknowledgement without action is meaningless. You will need to follow through. This is the measure of true leadership, and it will define the culture of your crew, your airline, and ultimately the experience of every passenger under your responsibility. Kelly Morton's hands had stopped trembling. Her voice was steadier now, resolute. "I accept the challenge. I will undergo the training, meet with affected passengers, and commit to ongoing reflection. I will not allow my past mistakes to define the future. I will make amends." The cabin, though still tense, felt lighter somehow. A collective acknowledgement had taken place. People were witnessing not just confrontation, but the potential for transformation. The principles Marcus had laid out, honesty, transparency, action, accountability, were clear and unavoidable. No one could ignore them. Maya Tran whispered again, this time louder, as if speaking to herself as much as to her camera. "This is real change. This is how it starts, with accountability that can be seen and felt." Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. The tension inside him, the frustration, the flashes of anger, all tempered by control, had transformed into clarity and resolve. The cabin had become a forum for moral education, a stage where systemic issues could be addressed in real time. His role was not vengeance, not confrontation for spectacle, but calibration setting a standard for how dignity, fairness, and accountability must operate in shared spaces. Captain Reynolds turned toward the cockpit, silently signaling his readiness to implement changes, to participate in training, to create systems that were fair, equitable, and transparent. Kelly Morton straightened her posture, her commitment visible in the set of her jaw, the firmness of her gaze, the acknowledgement that her actions would now be under constant self-scrutiny. Marcus walked slowly down the aisle, pausing at each row, making eye contact with passengers. Each nod, each gesture, each recognition of their shared humanity reinforced the message he had delivered. This was not a performance, it was a blueprint for change. The lessons of accountability, dignity, and systemic responsibility would echo far beyond the walls of the cabin. Finally, he returned to his seat, calm but unwavering. He looked around once more, absorbing the faces, the reactions, the silent understanding that had taken root. The cabin had shifted from a space of tension and inequality to a microcosm of accountability and potential change. Every passenger, crew member, and observer would carry a piece of this experience with them. A reminder that dignity is not negotiable, that fairness is not optional, and that courage combined with clarity can transform even the most entrenched systems. Captain Reynolds exhaled deeply, relieved yet aware that the real work had only begun. Kelly Morton remained poised, committed, and newly conscious of the responsibilities she bore. The passengers returned to their seats, still quiet, still reflective, yet imbued with a sense of hope and the undeniable power of accountability. Marcus Hale leaned back, eyes steady, voice calm, knowing that today had set a precedent. The flight, the confrontation, the acknowledgement, and the commitment to systemic change would ripple outward. It would not end here. It could not. The principles were clear, the actions defined, and the responsibility unshakable. In that moment, the aircraft felt less like a vehicle in motion and more like a vessel of transformation. Every seat, every aisle, every face bore witness to a moral reckoning that transcended individual grievances, reaching toward a horizon where fairness, dignity, and justice were not aspirations, but operational imperatives embedded in every decision, every interaction, every action taken on board or beyond. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, letting the cabin hum with quiet reflection. The work ahead was monumental, but today, a step had been taken. Today, accountability was no longer theoretical, it was lived, observed, and committed to. The flight continued, engines steady, passengers watching, crew transformed, and Marcus Hale, calm and resolute, had ensured that the invisible lines of responsibility had been made undeniably visible. The hum of the engines filled the cabin with a soft, rhythmic background as the passengers absorbed the gravity of what had just transpired. Marcus Hale remained in his seat, eyes scanning the cabin with quiet awareness. The tension that had gripped the aircraft for over an hour had eased, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism, the kind that comes only when people realize change is both necessary and possible. He allowed himself a brief exhale, feeling the weight of responsibility that had been lifted ever so slightly. Captain Reynolds and Kelly Morton had taken their positions at the front of the cabin, visibly trying to regain composure while processing the extraordinary events. There was a new energy in the air, a subtle but undeniable shift in the atmosphere. Every crew member and passenger now seemed more attentive, more conscious of the roles they played, and of the ripple effects of their choices. Marcus's calm authority had forced an undeniable mirror upon everyone present, reflecting truths they could no longer ignore. Passengers whispered to one another, their voices laced with disbelief and admiration. Some gestured subtly toward Marcus, while others captured short videos, perhaps for social media, but more importantly, as documentation of a moment that could inspire broader accountability beyond this single flight. The world outside the aircraft would witness what unfolded here. But inside, a personal reckoning had taken place for everyone present. Marcus allowed himself to look out the window at the vast expanse of sky stretching endlessly in every direction. He felt the enormity of what had just occurred. This flight, ordinary on the surface, had become extraordinary, a microcosm of societal challenges and opportunities for transformation. He thought about how often people chose comfort over confrontation, silence over speaking out, convenience over courage. Today, he had forced a confrontation, but not with anger or spectacle. He had demanded clarity, accountability, and a commitment to do better. Captain Reynolds approached him once more, hesitant but sincere. "Marcus, I want to thank you for holding us accountable. I know this wasn't easy, and I know I have a long road ahead to ensure these lessons are implemented." Marcus nodded. The lesson is simple but profound. Accountability is not optional. It is not performative. It is a responsibility you carry with every decision, every interaction, and every moment of choice. The actions we take after the confrontation will define the culture of this airline, the trust of its passengers, and the safety and dignity of everyone on board. Kelly Morton stepped forward, a renewed sense of purpose emanating from her. "I've realized something essential today. Being professional is not enough if professionalism masks bias or neglect. True professionalism is empathy in action, fairness in every decision, and courage when confronting uncomfortable truths. I will do my part to ensure that this crew and every crew I train uphold those principles. No one should ever feel unseen, dismissed, or disrespected while in our care." A few rows back, Maya Tran, still holding her phone, whispered to the passengers around her, "This is more than a story for social media. This is a blueprint for integrity and accountability." We are witnessing a live example of how courage and moral clarity can create systemic change. The murmurs turned into soft conversations as passengers reflected on the personal and societal implications of the events. Some quietly considered their own biases, their unspoken assumptions, and moments of inaction that had affected others. Others simply marveled at the courage it took for one individual to demand justice in such a controlled, high-stakes environment. Marcus leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a moment of introspection. He had spent his life navigating corporate battles, legal frameworks, and public scrutiny. But this confrontation had been different. This had been about humanity, about the intersection of power and accountability, and about the courage to hold others accountable while maintaining dignity and composure. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that the seeds of change had been planted, though he knew the work would continue long after the flight landed. Captain Reynolds approached the intercom and addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, We want to acknowledge the events that took place on this flight and assure you that the airline is committed to meaningful change. We will implement training programs, review policies, and take immediate steps to prevent any recurrence of bias or neglect. Your safety, dignity, and trust are our highest priorities. The cabin responded with nods, quiet applause, and the occasional hum of acknowledgement. There was no performative cheer, no empty satisfaction. This was a collective recognition of accountability, a shared understanding that integrity had been demanded and, in part, achieved. Marcus allowed his gaze to move across the cabin one final time. He saw passengers who had previously been preoccupied with phones, work, or travel anxiety, now engaged in subtle reflection. He saw crew members who had once followed routine without question now visibly aware of their responsibilities beyond procedure manuals. He saw potential for change, not as an abstract ideal, but as a tangible reality within the confines of this aircraft. As the plane began its descent, the hum of the engines accompanied by the soft rustle of seat belts and murmured conversations created an almost meditative atmosphere. Marcus considered the lessons of the day courage tempered with composure, accountability enacted through deliberate action, and moral clarity that demands recognition, reflection, and correction. These were not merely personal victories. They were principles with societal resonance. Kelly Morton stood at the front, her posture more confident, her eyes no longer shadowed by hesitation. She had experienced a profound shift, recognizing that leadership and authority are inseparable from responsibility and moral courage. She silently vowed to honor that lesson, not through words, but through consistent, observable action. Captain Reynolds adjusted the controls, guiding the aircraft steadily toward the runway. He had internalized the gravity of Marcus's confrontation and understood that his role extended far beyond piloting an aircraft safely. Leadership, he realized, was also about modeling integrity, demonstrating accountability, and creating conditions for fairness and respect in every interaction. Whether with passengers or crew, as the plane touched down smoothly, the cabin erupted in quiet relief. There was no overt celebration, but a shared recognition of having been part of something significant. Marcus Hale rose from his seat, his calm presence radiating authority tempered with empathy. He offered a brief nod to the crew and passengers alike, a gesture acknowledging their roles in this transformative moment. The flight attendants, once hesitant and defensive, now approached with sincerity and respect. Kelly Morton made eye contact with Marcus, a silent understanding passing between them. This confrontation had been painful but necessary, and the true work was only beginning. Marcus walked down the aisle, each step measured, deliberate, embodying the calm certainty that had defined his actions throughout the flight. Passengers quietly observed, some standing to offer nods or subtle gestures of gratitude, acknowledging his courage and the clarity he had brought to a tense and complex situation. The door opened upon arrival, and airport personnel began to board. Marcus allowed himself one last look at the cabin. He had turned a moment of injustice into a demonstration of accountability, a lesson in moral courage, and a call to systemic change. He knew the effects would ripple beyond the aircraft, inspiring conversations, policies, and perhaps even a shift in corporate and social consciousness. As he stepped onto the tarmac, sunlight casting long shadows across the ground, Marcus Hale felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The confrontation had been resolved, but more importantly, The principles of integrity, fairness, and accountability had been affirmed. He had done what was necessary to demand change, and in doing so, had left a lasting impact on everyone who had witnessed it. This flight, ordinary in its destination, extraordinary in its moral significance, would be remembered not just for the conflict it contained, but for the clarity, courage, and accountability it demanded. The passengers, crew, and even the airline would carry the lessons forward, shaping decisions, interactions, and policies for years to come. Marcus Hale walked into the terminal with composed determination, knowing that justice had been served, accountability had been enforced, and a meaningful precedent had been set. The world outside might not fully understand the depth of the transformation that had occurred on this aircraft, but those who were present would never forget. As the plane lands and the cabin settles into a newfound quiet, the story of Marcus Hale leaves a lingering impression. The courage to demand justice, the power of integrity, and the necessity of accountability resonate far beyond the flight itself. His composure and moral clarity transformed not just the crew and passengers, but the very system that sought to deny him dignity. This story reminds us that discrimination and entitlement can surface anywhere, even in spaces we assume are safe. It challenges us to reflect on our own biases, confront injustices in our communities, and recognize that true strength lies in standing for what is right calmly, deliberately, and with unwavering resolve. Let Marcus's journey inspire you to question systems, amplify your voice against inequality, and uphold principles of fairness in your own life. Remember, change begins with awareness, and awareness begins with witnessing moments like this. If this story moved you, provoked thought, or sparked emotion, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Join us for more real-life stories that blend drama, courage, and lessons in human dignity. Together, we can keep the conversation alive and continue challenging the world for the better.